ultimately, as we're seeing in the left-wing judgment of what's happening in Israel and Hamas and Gaza, you equalize good and evil. And in fact, they've overshot, of course, in that equalization process. That process has led them to actually regard Israel as the evil one and the perpetrators of the violence as, the oppressed.
Welcome to the Debrief, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by Editor-in-Chief Hugo Gurdon. And Hugo, you've talked about, the left always talks about how they're interested in equality, but when it comes to the war in Israel with Hamas, there's an interesting spin on equality that they have. What have you argued?
Well, yes, they've almost come to the conclusion that they want equality between good and evil. The fundamental idea on the left of almost all policies that you look at, socialist or radical egalitarian, whatever you want to call it, is to excuse and ameliorate the problems caused by failure and to tax and to tax success, to equalize society. In some ways that can be that's fine. It may be that it should be that society looks after people who are incapable of looking after themselves. But the process has a big moral cost. And that is that when you equalize the results of doing something well, rather as with those things which, with doing them badly, you reduce the incentives and you begin to equalize right and wrong. And ultimately, as we're seeing in the left-wing judgment of what's happening in Israel and Hamas and Gaza, you equalize good and evil. And in fact, they've overshot, of course, in that equalization process. That process has led them to actually regard Israel as the evil one and the perpetrators of the violence as, the oppressed.
Right. At a minimum, you're looking at equivalency more than you are equality. But, in the case of at least a handful of the progressive Democrats in the House, there seems to be an over-identification with Hamas because of the extent of their criticism of Israel.
Yes, there is. And we've just had a major example of it recently. In the as everybody knows, there was a massive explosion close to a hospital in Gaza. And it was originally said by Hamas to be an Israeli attack. I can't remember if they said it was a missile or a bomb that hit the hospital and killed 500 innocent people. The analysis done both by the Israeli Defense Forces and indeed by the United States make it pretty clear that this was actually a misfired missile by Gaza. It didn't hit the hospital. It didn't kill nearly 500 people. It did kill a lot of people who were actually in the parking lot outside the hospital. But both Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Congresswoman Tlaib immediately tweeted, reinforcing the Hamas line on this, accusing Israel essentially of committing a massive war crime. And so they were retailing and repeating Hamas terrorist propaganda. And this immediately sparked protests all around the region, with people attacking the Israeli and American embassies. So yes, both of those Congresswomen and indeed others, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is another, siding essentially with Hamas propaganda. And with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, it was accusing Israel of collective punishment of Hamas because it had cut off water and electricity supplies. The point that I tried to make in reply is this isn't collective punishment. It isn't punishment of any sort. It's war. And they have laid siege to the place which attacked them. And is not a war crime.
So, the left often talks about disinformation, and propaganda is something that certainly happens in any war. But it does really seem that this is a conflict where competition about what the information is really almost as important as what's happening on the battlefield.
Yes, it's immensely important. And of course, one of the reasons that it is so is that both sides have to influence world opinion, and the communications that we have available to us through social media and instant transmission of video means that opinions can be shifted extremely fast, which is what we saw, of course, with all the demonstrations and attacks and angry protesters in all of the Middle Eastern capitals just recently. Hamas wants to make sure that the propaganda makes it extremely difficult for Israel to do what it obviously needs to do and currently intends to do, which is to go into Gaza and uproot Hamas, essentially remove Hamas permanently. Israel needs to make sure that the propaganda doesn't do that. It needs to have continued backing from world backing. Fortunately, at the moment, there's very strong backing from Washington. President Biden's visit to Israel is part of that. The movement of 2 carrier battle fleets into the Eastern Mediterranean is a strong signal for other countries not to get involved. At the moment, Israel has the backing of what one might loosely call the civilized world. But there will be a fight over the messaging for as long as this goes on.
Thank you, Hugo.
Thank you.
You can read Hugo and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.